The Senate hearing had barely started when Elizabeth Warren leaned forward, eyebrows arched, voice sharp. With all due respect, Senator Kennedy, your statement is not only misleading, it's a lie. A hush fell across the room. Cameras clicked to life like wolves sniffing blood. The panel's posture stiffened. Kennedy didn't blink. He calmly reached into the leather binder on his desk, slow, deliberate, with the kind of rhythm that doesn't chase applause but commands attention. He slid a printed document across the surface, tapping it once with his pen. Page 12, he said. His accent, unapologetically Southern, cut through the marble stillness. I'd suggest you read it before calling it a lie, Senator. Warren glanced down, visibly annoyed. She didn't touch the paper. Her smile, tight and practiced, cracked just enough to reveal uncertainty. The room wasn't breathing. They were waiting. This is a draft report, she shot back, not an official finding. Kennedy leaned in slightly, still calm, voice lower now, like a lawyer just before delivering a closing argument. It's the preliminary version you signed off on. The same one you used to accuse 3 agencies of negligence. So if it's invalid, Senator, then why'd you use it to launch a press tour last month? Boom. The words didn't echo. They dropped like a gavel. Even the stenographer paused. Warren reached for a glass of water she hadn't touched. She didn't drink. Kennedy, meanwhile, flipped to page 13. He wasn't finished. Senator Kennedy didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. As Elizabeth Warren shuffled the pages in front of her, still refusing to acknowledge the document laid bare between them, Kennedy tapped the edge of the next sheet. His fingers steady, gaze locked in. Page 13, he repeated, is where your name appears next to the recommendations that contradicted the same agencies you just dismissed. Gasps were subtle, but present. The gallery wasn't full of press today, it was full of staffers, aides, and a handful of interns who now leaned forward like they were watching something historic. Because they were. Warren straightened her spine. Senator, I'm not here to play courtroom theatrics. Kennedy smiled, just barely. Then you should have brought facts instead of fire. She opened her mouth, but he continued. I respect passion, Senator Warren. I do. But you stood on a stage 2 weeks ago and told the American people that Homeland Security willingly ignored the findings of this draft. He held up the document again. The very draft you now claim is invalid. Warren shifted in her chair. Her voice came quieter, clipped. The situation evolved. We obtained more data. And yet, Kennedy countered, you haven't provided it. You went to the cameras with claims, not corrections. He paused, letting the weight of that settle. I'm not accusing you of lying, Senator, he added, his tone razor thin. I'm just reminding you of what you already confirmed in black and white. Warren no longer looked defiant, she looked cornered. Kennedy didn't press further. Not yet. He just let the silence hang, knowing that sometimes, truth doesn't need volume, only a spotlight. And in that moment, every eye was on her. Senator Warren tried to pivot. We can cherry-pick lines from internal drafts all day, Senator Kennedy, but this isn't a game of gotcha. We're here to protect the American people. Kennedy nodded slowly, as if agreeing. But then, like a seasoned prosecutor flipping open his final piece of evidence, he reached down and pulled out a second folder, navy blue, thick, with tabs and highlights peeking from the edges. He laid it down gently. This, he said, is the full communication log between your office and the Department of Homeland Security over the last 6 months. Warren's jaw tightened. Kennedy continued, voice even, tone cutting. It contains 42 emails. In 17 of them, your office directly references this draft report as conclusive, your word, not mine. You didn't question its validity when it served your narrative. Only now, when it's inconvenient. Warren tried to interrupt, but Kennedy raised a hand, not rude, not aggressive. Just enough to command silence. I haven't released these yet, he added, eyes narrowing. I brought them here today because the American people deserve the full picture, not just what makes for a good soundbite. Reporters in the back of the chamber jolted into action. Phones lit up. Everyone knew what this was now, a public unraveling. Warren leaned back, arms crossed, forcing a calm she didn't feel. Kennedy pushed the folder an inch toward her. "You're welcome to review it, Senator. Page 27 might jog your memory." That one sentence stung. Because the last time she quoted that email on national television, she'd left out a line, the line that admitted the conclusions were preliminary and not final. And now Kennedy had it in his hand. The room wasn't cold. But Elizabeth Warren looked like she'd just felt a draft run straight through her narrative. Elizabeth Warren reached for the folder, but not to open it, just to move it away from the cameras. She set it off to the side like it was toxic. But Kennedy didn't let it go unnoticed. "Senator," he began, "you've made quite a career accusing others of cherry-picking data. But when the page turns on your narrative, you call it manipulation." Warren scoffed, trying to maintain control. "With all due respect." "With all due respect," Kennedy cut in, "you told the nation that Homeland Security's failure was deliberate. And I quote," he flipped a note card, "they had the truth in front of them, and they buried it." Then he held up a copy of the televised quote, her image frozen mid-sentence. "This was broadcast on every major outlet. But the truth is, you were the one still revising the truth behind closed doors." Warren shot back. "You're twisting timelines, Senator. I never claimed the draft was final." Kennedy leaned forward. His voice didn't rise, but the air around it did. "Then why did your chief of staff send a press release the very next day calling it a final summary? I've got the PDF. Dated, signed, and, funny enough, left out that disclaimer about it being preliminary." He paused. "Senator, did you omit that line on purpose?" That sentence didn't ask for a response, it dragged the spotlight and slammed it on her desk. Warren blinked. Once. Kennedy didn't. He stacked his papers slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact. The room felt tighter, smaller, like it was closing in. "I don't mind political theater, Senator," he said. "But I do mind when it replaces the facts." The audience wasn't clapping. But they weren't blinking either. Because Kennedy didn't just bring paperwork. He brought a mirror. And Elizabeth Warren was now staring straight into it. Elizabeth Warren sat motionless. Her usual fire had dimmed, not gone, but clearly flickering. She scanned the top page of the folder, her fingers hovering as if contact alone might ignite a defense. But Kennedy didn't wait. He pulled out one final sheet, just one. No folder. No dramatic pause. "This," he said, holding it up so the cameras could see, "is the internal note attached to the draft report. Dated 2 days before your televised accusation. And it includes a footnote, footnote 7, that states, and I quote, 'Findings contained herein are not final, conclusive, or approved for dissemination beyond internal review.'" He let it hang in the air. Then he dropped it on the table, face up. Warren shifted. Her lips parted, then closed again. No words came. Not yet. Kennedy leaned in, elbows resting gently on the wood. "You claimed this document proved intent. You used it to rally outrage. But this footnote, this one line, dismantles the entire claim." Warren forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "This is political sabotage." Kennedy shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am. This is accountability, and I understand that's gone out of fashion in some circles, but not in this one." A few heads nodded. Even a few from her side of the aisle. He didn't gloat. He didn't grandstand. He just picked up the sheet again, turned it toward her, and said, "If you missed that line, Senator, then this was reckless. If you ignored it, then this was deliberate. Which one is it?" Warren finally spoke, but this time her voice cracked. I'll have to review the full draft again." Kennedy nodded once. "Good. The American people already have." And just like that, the narrative shifted. Because facts don't flinch. And footnotes don't lie. Warren tried to recover. Senator Kennedy, I've spent decades fighting for truth. You may question my methods, but not my intentions. Kennedy didn't flinch. Intentions, Senator, he said, don't erase consequences. He stood, slowly, commanding yet calm. Not showboating. This wasn't theater for him. It was deposition. He continued, you say you fight for truth, but truth doesn't require a press tour. It requires precision. It requires context. And it requires honesty even when it doesn't serve your politics. Warren opened her mouth, but Kennedy cut through. You used a draft to fuel outrage, skipped the disclaimers, and ignored internal warnings. And now, when that draft's full language is exposed, you call it sabotage? He turned to the committee chair. Mr. Chairman, I move to enter the full communication log, the draft report with all footnotes, and the internal memos into the record. The chair, clearly uneasy, glanced around the room. Without objection, so ordered. Warren lowered her head slightly. Not in defeat, but in recognition. She'd lost the moment. And in Washington, that's sometimes worse than losing the vote. Kennedy sat back down, adjusting his tie like he'd just finished a closing argument in court. Not smug. Just certain. One camera caught Warren staring down at the folder again, hands clenched, jaw set. Another caught Kennedy scribbling something on a yellow notepad. Quiet. Methodical. He didn't speak again. He didn't have to. The room didn't clap. No applause, no viral moment of standing ovations. Just silence. Because sometimes, the loudest verdict is the one whispered between power brokers after the hearing ends. And in that silence, one truth echoed. Kennedy didn't crush Warren with anger. He buried her argument with paper. After the submission of the documents, the room settled into an uneasy quiet, the kind that only truth can create. Senator Warren avoided Kennedy's eyes now. Her fingers tapped the desk, out of rhythm, out of control. Every second of silence felt like a sentence. Kennedy sat still. He wasn't reveling in the moment. He was letting it land. Across the table, a junior senator whispered something to Warren, but she didn't respond. Her mind wasn't in the room anymore. It was 2 weeks back, on that press stage, declaring the draft as a damning, final confirmation. Now, it sat in front of her, cut wide open, its footnotes screaming the opposite. Kennedy finally looked up. Senator Warren, he said, we don't serve the people by bending facts into headlines. We serve them by honoring the full page, even the parts that don't trend. A few heads nodded, quietly. Even some who didn't agree with his politics couldn't deny the weight of his words. Warren tried again. This draft was evolving. It wasn't about hiding, it was about momentum. Kennedy cocked his head. You launched a firestorm with a draft you now call incomplete. Then you blame the burn on the smoke. She clenched her jaw. Her defense was no longer about facts, it was about survival. Kennedy turned to the chair once more. Mr. Chairman, I yield. I've made my case. The documents speak louder than I ever could. And with that, he gathered his papers, nodded respectfully to the panel, and leaned back in his chair. No fist-pounding. No cheap jabs. Just a man who used truth like a scalpel, and left the wounds to speak for themselves. Because in a room full of noise, Kennedy knew something vital. You don't win with thunder. You win when your silence becomes the echo they can't ignore. By evening, the clip had already gone viral. Not a shouting match. Not a scandal. Just Kennedy calmly turning documents, one page at a time, while Warren stared, expression frozen, at footnotes she'd hoped no one would read. Cable news scrambled to react. Some tried spinning it. Others aired the full hearing without commentary. But what caught the public wasn't the pundits, it was the silence. The moment Warren blinked. The pause after Kennedy said, "Which one is it?" You couldn't script that. In the Capitol cafeteria the next morning, aides whispered over coffee. Kennedy had done what few managed in modern politics: he'd buried an opponent without ever raising his voice. He didn't walk out of that hearing with applause. He walked out with credibility. One headline read, "Kennedy brings footnotes to a firefight." Warren's team released a statement, "We stand by the senator's commitment to transparency." But transparency, this time, wasn't theirs to define. Kennedy returned to work as if nothing happened. When a reporter tried to ask about the viral moment, he simply smiled. "I just read the footnotes." That line spread faster than the clip itself. And in town halls across the country, voters, some of whom hadn't cared about the hearing at all, suddenly wanted to read page 13. Because something rare had happened. Not a takedown. Not a scandal. A reckoning, built on paper. Kennedy didn't need to convince the crowd. He let the facts speak. And the people listened. By Friday, something unexpected had happened. Page 12 became a meme. Not the kind built from humor, but from precision. Screenshots of the line Kennedy referenced were now circulating on social media, overlaid with quotes like, "Context matters," and, "The page Warren didn't quote." Even people unfamiliar with the hearing were suddenly Googling the full report. Warren's team attempted to reclaim the narrative, holding a press conference. She stepped up to the podium, sharp in tone. "The report was a draft, yes. But the facts remain. We need accountability." The press wasn't convinced. One reporter raised his hand, "Senator, did you or did you not receive the final disclaimer? The one entered into the Senate record by Senator Kennedy?" Warren hesitated. Again. Meanwhile, Kennedy gave no interviews. He issued no statements. He was already in a different committee room, reviewing infrastructure policy. But the silence around him now had weight. At that moment, another senator from her own party leaned over during a closed-door meeting and whispered, "You should have read page 12. Because that's what it had become. Not just a page, but a symbol. Of haste. Of narrative building over nuance. Of what happens when a talking point outruns the truth. Kennedy didn't need to spike the football. He had already moved on, leaving behind only a record and a question. If a senator overlooks a footnote once, is it a mistake? If she does it twice, was it ever about the truth? Warren was still speaking to the cameras, but America was now listening to paper. A week later, the noise had faded, but the echo stayed. Warren had moved on, or at least tried to. She pivoted her speeches back to economic equity, back to familiar ground. But whenever she faced a tough crowd, someone always raised a hand and asked, "What about page 12? Kennedy didn't follow up on cable news. He didn't need to. His argument wasn't made for ratings, it was made for the record. In a private conversation with junior senators, one of them asked, "Why didn't you push harder when you had her cornered?" Kennedy smiled. Because when someone walks themselves into a corner, all you have to do is turn on the light. The phrase stuck. So did the hearing. Clips were now being used in law school courses: how to cross-examine without aggression, how to let documentation breathe. Even longtime critics of Kennedy admitted it: he didn't grandstand. He litigated. The phrase, "read page 12, became shorthand for due diligence across bureaucracies. Interns whispered it to each other before presenting. Journalists began fact-checking political statements against original drafts more aggressively. All because one senator opened a folder and let the paper speak. Warren's credibility hadn't vanished, but it had cracked. Kennedy didn't destroy her. He made her argument collapse under its own weight. Because that's the thing about truth, it doesn't trend like a tweet. It tolls like a bell. Slow. Clear. And once it rings, even the loudest voices have to pause. You just witnessed what happens when politics meets precision, when a senator doesn't shout, doesn't spin, but simply opens the file and flips to the right page. Elizabeth Warren brought sound bites. Kennedy brought substance. She had a headline. He had page 12. And in Washington, where noise often drowns out truth, Kennedy reminded America of something vital. Real leadership doesn't just speak louder. It speaks last. So the next time someone calls a document damning, ask them if they read the footnotes. Because in this story, Kennedy didn't just win the moment. He rewrote the narrative.